And of course, Bitcoin is in that sense a massive trigger of inspiration because it gives me so many things that I can tackle. Because at first glance, it's just this technology, but it touches so many aspects of our existence. Like it touches economics, obviously technology, monetary, financial topics, even the philosophy, game theory, then self responsibility, then the social aspect of what do I do with my no-coiner friends, and there's so many things you can talk about that I have almost 200 comics now, and I still have loads of ideas. So.
Hey everybody, this is the High Hash Rate Podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Dan.
And this podcast is just two plebs getting high and talking about Bitcoin, life, and the absurdity of the fiat world. Our guests don't necessarily get high with us, and you don't have to either.
But it helps.
Yo, welcome back to High Hash Rate. Today we have a special guest, Lina, and you may know her from Twitter and the Little Hodler plushie doll that you might see all over social media and with heads of state and other Bitcoin celebrities. Lina, how you doing?
I'm doing great. That's an epic intro. I want that done everywhere
now. Based on your social media feed, it seems like you've been traveling a lot recently, and you're kind of a digital nomad, so to speak. What have you been up to this summer? What has been the highlights of your traveling?
Okay, so I have traveled a lot. I've been to a lot of places and a lot of conferences actually. So I just kind of go from conference to conference, and because they're all coming back now. It's like during the pandemic there was nothing, and then we had this 1 year where they slowly started up, and now they're all back and a dozen new conferences, and somehow I went to a lot of them, which helps me decide where to go. So I did go to a lot of places, spent a lot of time in Europe. I went to Asia, Southeast Asia, back to Southeast Asia, I must say, earlier this year. Just one of my favorite areas to spend time. And I went to El Salvador, and not gonna lie, that was my highlight.
And that was your first trip to El Salvador?
That was my first trip to El Salvador, but not the last.
Oh yeah, we've that's where me and Mike actually met, which is kind of the origin story to High Hash Rate. We met on the beach in El Zante. Did you get to spend time in El Zante, or were you kind of traveling around the rest of the country mostly?
I did. I went to a lot of places, including El Zante. It was a bad day for surfing, I was told. I saw one guy, actually that was El Junco. I saw one guy surf. He tried very hard, and at the end I did capture him surf one wave, but they all told me it's a bad day to surf, come back another time. But I don't surf, so it's fine. But yeah, I did go to El Zante.
I tried to take surfing lessons down there when I was there in February of last year, and I'm not going to lie, I've told this story before. I thought I was going to die. It was like the waves were just crashing me. I'm like, hey, this is a lot of fun, but I think I need a surf instructor who understands that I'm just not ready for these big waves. But it was fun.
You were going to go surfing, never having surfed before, without an instructor?
No, I had an instructor. He just kind of threw me to the wolves, so to speak. And I survived barely. But it was a good time.
It's one way to teach. Yeah.
It was a good learning experience, I'll say that much.
Were there any particulars about El Salvador that you wanted to highlight, or that really stand out?
Yeah, let me piggyback on that. What was your expectations of El Salvador, and how were those different from when you landed and when you got to see the country?
That's a good question. So, I've been following the news on El Salvador for a while, and I also know you cannot necessarily trust the news on El Salvador. So I also read a lot of reviews and reports from people that people on the internet and then people on Twitter. Obviously, a lot of Bitcoiners went, and that gave me a pretty good picture, I would say. And I also had some friends on the ground. So I had certain expectations. If anything, they were surpassed massively. So I expected it to be a nice country. Of course, you always have this thought in the back of your head, especially when people tell you, look, you're going there. The country used to be super dangerous. You don't know what it's like now. You're a solo female traveler. Like, how can you just go there? But in the end, I felt extremely safe the entire time. So that was not even a concern, not once. What really surprised me was how welcoming and hospitable people were. So for example, I had a contact on the ground, and I just knew her through a friend. So her brother is a friend of mine, and I told him, look, I'm going to El Salvador. Like, can you tell me the best places to go? And he said, yeah, my sister's there. She can tell you. So I contacted her. She had never seen me before. She didn't know me. And I thought she was going to tell me, yeah, you can go to the volcano or something. So I messaged her and she said, yeah, no problem. I'll take you everywhere. So that entire trip, she took me everywhere. And we drove to the far west of El Salvador, to a little village called Ataco, which is really beautiful. And she made so much time. She explained everything to me. And through her, I also got a very good idea of the changes, like how life was before versus after the current government. So that was extremely nice. And then I was very surprised at the pupusas, which were amazing.
Oh, the pupusas are delicious. They can be
So good
dangerous.
and so bad for you.
Yeah. Yes. One thing, if you just know, like you said, you had a contact, if you just know to plan a little bit ahead of time, you can get in like 1 or 2 Telegram groups or a Twitter DM. And from there, you can get a taxi ride or, somebody that you can pay in Bitcoin to take you just about anywhere. And it's super easy any time of the day. That's one of the things I noticed that was so convenient, and everybody is so welcoming down there. And they're just so happy to have outsiders come and see, it's a beautiful country, and people to come see that and to enjoy and spend their time there. I love Hotel Machanti in El Zante. I stay there every time I go. Last time I went there, they gave me a hotel T-shirt, and they're like, "You're a complimentary manager today," or whatever, because you've sent so many people our way. And it's a small and tight community. Yeah, yeah.
I think you need one of these codes that gets you.
Yeah, people are so welcoming. Yeah.
No, sorry.
Yeah, and people are so happy to have you there. I felt that a lot, and I felt a general happiness that I found very unique, a general optimism, and you see it in a lot of things. You see it just when you walk outside, you see it in the infrastructure that's changing, you see it in how people talk about their country, in how proud they are to have you share in what they have, which I found really amazing. A very new experience.
Can you talk about, you got to meet the president of El Salvador. Can you talk about that experience and what it was like to hang out with President Bukele?
It was very cool. It was actually the second time we met, which is kind of crazy if I think about it. But we met first in Istanbul almost two years ago now. Yeah. So there was this time he came to Istanbul and everybody was like, oh, he's going to orange pill Erdogan. So that was the time that we first met, because I had actually cold DM'd him before with some request a couple months prior. And obviously he never got back to me, but somehow he must have remembered that I was in Turkey, because when he came, I think it was 3 months later, he DM'd me back on Twitter and he said, well, you're in Turkey, right? I'm coming and I want a hodler. Can I have a hodler? And I said, yeah, you can have a hodler. And then, we went on, we joined one of these dinner events, and then I brought the hodler. So he had one of my very, very first prototypes he got. That was back then. And then, I told him this year, I want to come back. I don't want to come back. I want to come there to El Salvador. And he said, cool, do it. And I told him, I have a new hodler. I have your hodler. I have you as a hodler. So you want that? Right. And he said, yeah, I want that. And so, that managed to get me inside the presidential offices to take those photos.
Amazing. This little hodler gets you into to see the president of El Salvador. It's amazing.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing. Yeah. But, it's kind of his deal. He's very, it's who he is, right? He's very approachable. He's not your usual politician. Yeah.
Just to,
I noticed on the
sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, this has turned into such a big sort of business and goings on in the Bitcoin space. I'm sort of curious about the evolution of this company that you have, and like where you started, how it sort of evolved.
What is the genesis story of the first Little Hodler?
Right, the genesis.
Which I'm sure you've answered this question many times.
I have to say. No, it's all right. It's good for me because I need to practice that story. So the more I tell it, the better I get at it, hopefully. Yeah, but no, so that originally started around 2020 when I was it was in 2020. It was shortly after the halving. And it was around that time when Bitcoin was 9,000, hovering around there. And we had that over 9,000 meme for months going on. And it was like the tail end of the bear market. And the halving was done. And we knew it was just a matter of time till we cracked 10,000. And from there, the sky's the limit, obviously. So there was this mood. And I had this idea for a tweet. But frankly, I was never a big fan of doing these sensational tweets. I have a long history of making them, just because when I went on Bitcoin Twitter, the first time I looked around, I saw, okay, what do people do here? That's kind of what they did. Like these kind of
sensational deep tweets, like this is the, yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of cringe now, but that was everything back then.
It was everything. Yeah. So, I used to do these, and I have to say, yeah, it did work, but I didn't quite like it. And also because when you post slightly controversial things, then obviously what you're going to get back is the full force of Bitcoin Twitter. And I'm just not made for that. I'm a very agreeable person. I like peace and harmony. And so that wasn't really for me. And so whenever I would tweet something, I would actually turn off notifications for half a day just so I could deal with that, which is not very healthy. So I had this idea around that time, and then just randomly I thought of making it into a comic. I don't know how that came up. I just thought about it, and I made a comic with PowerPoint at the time, like stock photos and images. It looked so horrible. It's still somewhere, like I think it still like goes around on Reddit somewhere. But I posted that, and that became my most liked tweet at the time. Out of the blue. Like I had never gotten, I think it got 4,000 likes or something, and I had never seen that before. It was crazy. So that's when I first realized there was something there. And over time I did more of that, slowly at first, because it was not something that I was used to doing, making comics. That whole thought process hadn't really developed in my mind. And then I would say about half a year later, I made my first real comic with the Little Hodler, where I drew everything myself, because I realized, okay, there's something here. I can try and populate that niche more, but at some point I need a character so that I can actually tell the exact story I want. And I needed a very simple character, because I'm not the biggest like artist out there in terms of artistic skill set, but I can create something that delivers a message. So I made a very simple design for my character, and the Little Hodler, pretty much as he is today, was that design, was my first attempt, just super basic, which in the end turns out to have been very lucky, because through that he's extremely versatile. Like you remember him easily, but you can also dress him up and make him into special editions and that. So that, totally. As I say, it was a natural evolution. I did not like plan this out. And thinking back now, if I had planned out the way the brand would have gone, I don't know if I would have done it. Because if you think about it, in our industry, there's mostly men, grown adult men, and something cutesy and fluffy and like plush toys. Like, I don't know, nobody would have taken that business plan from me and gone, yeah, that's a good
That's
idea.
not very intuitive, but it worked. And it's kind of, you mentioned if I were to make this today, something about the Little Hodler, similar to Bitcoin itself. It's relatively simple. It's not all these bells and whistles. It's not super complex. It's a simple, basic thing that works. And people try to come up with solutions or competitors to Bitcoin, and they add all these, like I said, bells and whistles and all these extra features that really just end up being, in the long run, more of a drag than a helpful thing. So like you said, like you have this relatively basic plushie toy, and now everybody can design it and add their own flair to it if they want to add a new design, and it works really well. I mean, like you said, you've got Bukele plushie, you've got one for Bitcoin Magazine, you've got just different iterations. And I was telling Mike, I was like, we need to get a high hash rate plushie out there, and people can get that are fans of high hash rate and the plushie. Before you became an entrepreneur, an artist, and a storyteller in the Bitcoin community, anyways, what kind of was your background? What was your journey to the point where you're at now?
Very random and very just like doing whatever came up at the time, honestly.
Okay.
So I mean, to go that far back, all I kind of knew was from like when I was 12, I was like, as soon as I'm allowed to, I'm gonna move overseas, and that's all I knew. So like my entire school years, I was planning to move abroad, which I then did. I turned 18, I finished school, and then I moved abroad. I moved to Japan, and I lived in Asia for actually the better part of the last 10 years. I've lived in Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, that area. And I was working remotely actually the entire time. I was working in marketing, was doing things there. At some point during that one bull market in 2017, I got into shitcoins. So I was working on like shitcoin projects, as you do, as an evangelist and as like whatever names they would give you.
A blockchain enthusiast.
A blockchain enthusiast, yeah. I did that for some time, and it's actually kind of crazy how I was doing that for almost a year, and I did not have any touching points with Bitcoin at the time. It did not happen so for that, I was going to conferences and events, and I was doing all the traveling, and I would go to these events where, the kind of conference where you have a bunch of people come, and they all come to shill each other their coin, and nobody's listening to each other. So there's one guy who's like, oh, I have supply chain coin, it fixes the supply chains. Right. And there's the other one, oh, that's so nice, my project is weather forecast coin. And it's just a bunch of nothing. And so at some point it just felt like I could feel that I was wondering, what am I doing? Like, am I providing any value here? What's the point? And I then got to meet a few Bitcoiners. That was in, I think, the Philippines. And that was the first time the first time I started thinking and learning about Bitcoin. So they gave me some books. Obviously, The Internet of Money was probably the first one I read. Then like the standard books, the Bitcoin Standard among them. And at that point, things shifted, but like hardcore shifted for me. So I started thinking about inflation for the first time properly, not like a German, because I'm German, and we have there are ways inflation is taught in Germany, or used to be. It might be different now because we actually have inflation now in Germany. But back then it was more like, yeah, that's just this thing that happens and you deal with it. And that was the first time I started, thinking about it. Yeah.
We had Moritz from Spectre on, and he's also from Germany, and it's kind of the contrast, because in the United States, everybody's afraid of deflation because of the Great Depression and how terrible it was. So we're always avoiding deflation. And in Germany, it was hyperinflation just a few years before the Great Depression. So it's just everybody is scared of the money collapsing in a different way. In Europe, it's the money becomes, you have $1 trillion or 1 trillion marks and it's worth nothing. And here it's, you have, $30 and it can't buy anything because everything gets so cheap that nobody produces. When you started thinking about inflation living in Asia, what is the what is the monetary systems like in the countries that you visited, and how do they think about money in your experience?
Well, that's a big question
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, obviously, each country deals with it a little differently. Maybe some interesting ones. I mean, maybe a very interesting one's probably Turkey, where I am right
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's a big topic here, obviously. When I first got to Turkey, that was October 2021. And at the time, the exchange rate was $1 to 9.3 lira. And within a month of me being there, that went to 15 or 16 lira. And we could see people lining up at the gas stations trying to, get some gas before the prices go up. And then today, actually, I haven't checked in a while, but last I checked, it was 27 lira. And that is just the official inflation rate, right? So you have other things going on. So real estate prices are crazy in Istanbul. It's like you can't even imagine. And generally prices are going up. You can feel it, and people are trying to make do with that. So you can see the effects of it in general over the broader society. So Turkey actually during the last bull market was don't let me lie, the biggest market in Europe for Bitcoin and crypto. You have to say it's very crypto heavy, lots of altcoins going on here. And the second biggest in the world, if I'm not mistaken. There's millions of users here, and you have this very interesting setup where the government is not Bitcoin friendly. And I think we all remember when Erdogan said something about being at war with Bitcoin or something like that, right? There is a de facto ban on receiving payments in Bitcoin. So like getting paid for a service or product in Bitcoin is banned.
Does that improve like peer-to-peer use of Bitcoin, so people are more conscious of avoiding government scrutiny, government regulations, so they find ways to use Bitcoin correctly, so to speak? Or how does that affect, are people afraid to use Bitcoin, or is it just kind of like, the government won't let me do it, you just have to do it under the table, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot going on under the table also on the government side. I wouldn't be surprised. I have no proof, but I don't know, right? But Bitcoin is not banned. And so the interesting thing is that you have Bitcoin everywhere. You have billboards, you have ads in the cinema, you have massive exchanges here. You have everybody's trading, basically. People trade a lot. So it is huge. You just can't pay for stuff with it. So what people do is they buy Bitcoin, or they buy Tether a lot, and then they trade on the exchanges. And that is also I would say, a symptom of the wider economy, where if your money loses value so quickly and you're not allowed to, and you have trouble like holding even dollars, and you need to convert to gold or something like that, people would tell me like, I can buy a fridge and that's a store of value. Like, I know that's a joke, but people do buy cars as stores of value here. So if you're in that kind of mindset, then trading and making money quickly becomes very attractive. And that is something you see in struggling economies. It's similar in the Philippines, for example. I could witness like the MLM culture is huge there. So that is something that I noticed in countries like that.
Are you set up in? I just want to ask: are you set up in Turkey right now? Like your business?
Well, I am sitting in Turkey right now, but my company is in Malta.
Oh, copy. Okay.
Currently, my company is in Malta. I have spent like considerable amount of time in Turkey over the last 2 years. I'm actually about to go traveling again.
I was just asking, if you can't accept Bitcoin because you're saying that no one can accept Bitcoin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I do, yeah. No, yeah, I couldn't do that, for example. So I was thinking about it. I was thinking of opening my company here, but there was a no-go. So this is how you scare off businesses, which, you don't want to do, but they do.
You said you're getting ready to travel more often. What and you spent a lot of time in Asia. Are you going back to Asia, or are you expanding and seeing more places that you have not been able to visit yet?
Yeah, fun fact, I actually applied for a visa in Malaysia because I love
Oh,
Malaysia, and I applied a couple months ago. And I spent a lot of time in Malaysia. It's still like when somebody tells me where should I go, I always say go to Kuala Lumpur. But so they have a new visa, which I actually love, and I keep saying this, like smart countries create visas for digital nomads or just for people who work remotely. So they have that, and it's kind of like a innovation visa where you can say I work in blockchain, and then you can get the
mhm.
visa. So I did that. I said I work in blockchain, um, and it's like supposed to be kind of like a Bitcoin friendly thing, but then it turns out the whole Bitcoin thing did cause some did cause some complications. So that ended up in my application being delayed and still being pending. And then I looked around, and then I went to El Salvador, and now I'm thinking to go back to El Salvador and just travel that area a little bit, which is what I'm doing end of the month. So
What what kind of so you mentioned like the visa delay. What kind of complications do you run into? Do you ever get into a situation where you're in a country and you're kind of running up on your time and you have to leave, and the place that you plan to go next, you run into a delay or something? Do you have backup plans and contingency plans for where you're going to go next if something doesn't work out, or do you just kind of go with the flow?
I very much go with the flow, very very much go with the flow. So I I mean, I've had different styles of doing the traveling, like having a base somewhere. You always, I mean, being a full on digital nomad is great in theory, but it comes with issues. Just, for example, if you need a bank account, you need insurance, where do you get your mail, that kind of stuff. So being full on 100% digital nomad, and I don't live anywhere ever, not even in terms of address, is kind of difficult. So I actually
Mhm.
haven't done that. Obviously, I'll always have a residential address somewhere, have a registered address somewhere, but I have lived without a place to go back to per se. And then what I would do is just kind of go around, you know. I mean, I have a German passport, which I know makes it easier to travel worldwide.
Sure.
So I can just kind of see where to go next.
And you mentioned that, you know, at the age of 12 even, you were thinking about just getting out and traveling everywhere. What do you think attracted you to this idea that you wanted to see the world?
Oh, that is a very good question. That is such a good question. I think to me, it is traveling. Well, first of all, it broadens your horizon, obviously. It makes you more open to things that happen in the world, and it also makes the world smaller. And
Mhm.
I like, this is a personal preference, but I like being a stranger. I like being somewhere new, and I like figuring out what to do, where to go, and being open, seeing different cultures. I first did not consciously choose to do that, but I ended up doing more of it. For example, because I was doing the shitcoin stuff. I was going to all these conferences all over the world, and suddenly I was seeing all these different cultures, and I was getting to. For example, I had no plans to go to the Philippines, but I actually spent some time there, and I was shocked at like how nice people were, and what a different kind of lifestyle that was. And it taught me so much that at some point it became a kind of second nature. And it's interesting how that works, because you can get used to anything, right? So you can get used to a location, so you can get settled and set up in a location, you have your comfort zone, and then leaving that place becomes hard because of, well, you have social environment and all that, but also just because you kind of have your routines and all that. But just the same way, you can get used to being on the road. And I don't know which is better. I think there's, that's a very subjective thing to say. I like both, but I do. So lately, I've been feeling like, yeah, I want to go around again, and so that's what I'm doing.
Can I
Curiosity to answer
can I
your question.
piggyback on this just really quick? How I'm curious, how's the your travels have affected the Little Hodler, and basically how that's evolved as well.
Oh, that's also very interesting.
How do
You
you
ask
experience?
very
How do
good
your
questions.
experience? How do your experiences shape the comics and the Little Hodler?
That's a better
Do they
question.
inspire
Thank you, Dave.
those? Yeah.
No, oh, you guys ask
Well,
amazing
I always know how to
questions.
like interrupt
Um,
ideas and like completely make everything very awkward. So I'm very good at that. So anyway,
Derail it. Yeah, I love it. um, very much it's affected. Everything I do is affected by the things I experience. That is an artist thing, and that's also just a life thing, I think. So in everything I do, that includes Little Hodler and that includes other things I do. So in my free time, I write a lot. I make music, and that's all affected. So when I go to a place, Little Hodler specific, going to Turkey gave me a lot of perspective on things like government skepticism, because I saw that firsthand. Whereas I also then saw what's it like to be in a country where then people tend to be very tend to be questioning their government, but also have to be careful what they say about their government,
Mm,
at least if they
yeah.
have a big reach. Right? So those things, they kept me busy and they still keep me busy. Inflation's a huge one, obviously, but I also see how so that is one of the most rewarding things for me, that I would go places and I would be able to connect with the local communities, and I would go to a meetup and they would say, I sent your comic to my niece, to my mother, to my grandmother, and then we would start a conversation, and then through that new opportunities would open up. That is probably the most intense way that I was affected.
Um, we talked a little bit earlier about my experience surfing and how traumatic that was, so to speak. But we also talk a lot on the show about like jujitsu and these other very difficult tasks, and they're very masculine focused, usually something sports. But there's also, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of, maybe fear or just uncertainty about starting these new endeavors. But also that you can have that same feeling, that same anxiety when it comes to traveling the world, especially traveling the world by yourself at a young age. When you started to go to these places all over the planet, sometimes by yourself or maybe always by yourself, did you have that stress, that anxiety? Is that something you had to overcome? Did you find some sort of zen that allowed you to overcome that? Or do you still face it and you just face it head on as you do it?
That is another great question. I actually thought about this recently, and I thought, if I hadn't done it, and if I only started traveling now, if, for example, El Salvador was the first country I ever traveled to, I would be scared out of my mind. I would be like, oh my God, but the foreign ministry of Germany said exercise caution. And they said their politicians, like their government is run by a dictator, and the media said don't go, and my friends said you're alone and you're a woman. I would be scared. I would be so scared, and I probably wouldn't do it. But because back then, which I'm not saying is great, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into, I just went. I didn't think about it, and then I dealt with situations as they came. So I did a lot of stupid things for sure. I'm still doing stupid things probably, but I did them. I overcame them, and then that became a lesson. And then I became more proficient at traveling, let's say. So I lived some time in Manila, for example, which was a massive learning experience for me, because if you say, what's it like going to Manila, and you Google that, people are going to tell you, you're probably going to die there. Like, you're not going to make it out there. So I went there, and I actually had I liked it there. And obviously you have your trade-offs, and you have your, you have your good and your bad things. Everywhere you go, you have things that you need to pay attention to. There's cultural differences. There is differences in infrastructure, and obviously differences in level of development, language, and all that. If you live with that, if you manage to embrace that, then it doesn't have to be It doesn't have to be that scary, not as scary as the media
Right.
likes to make.
Right. And I think similar, it's very similar to just the Bitcoin journey in and of itself, where the idea of learning to use Bitcoin to run a node and to self-custody your Bitcoin is scary at first, similar to traveling, similar to surfing. But as you go through the process, it's all a journey of self-discovery. Once you learn that you have the capabilities, that you have the know-how to solve these problems, to face these hurdles, to just adapt and be flexible, and to do the right things and to make the right choices, the more self-confidence you gain, the easier it becomes, and like the wider the world becomes to you. And it's just a very exciting journey. And it sounds like some people find it, like I said, through jiu-jitsu, some people find it through a sport, some people find it through traveling. And it sounds like you probably found a lot about yourself and a lot of self-confidence through your ability to travel and to get through any obstacle that might be thrown in your way.
It's a very good point, because especially for things like self-custody, even just writing down a seed phrase, you can read yourself to exhaustion. And the more you read, the scarier it gets. And then it's like, yeah, oh my God, no way I do it is going to be perfect. There's always a risk. But what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, I shouldn't even do it. Like, I'll just give it to the bank. And then you don't do it. So sometimes it's good to just do it. There's a risk in everything. And sometimes the biggest risk is to not do it. So
totally.
I was going to say, it sounds like that's how you're sort of attacking the world in a way. It's like you approach something without knowing what it's going to be, sort of in this innocent way of like, oh, we'll just try it out. And then suddenly you explore, like you become successful in the travels, in the Little Hodler. It's like you just discover it as you go.
A lot of times I fail.
Well, as we should, right? We all should.
The more you learn about Bitcoin, the more you realize how complex it can be and how many scripts there are and how many ways you can screw up a transaction. But then, you travel the world, there's, like you said, there's so many different government, the ways the governments do things, authoritarian states, free states, different languages. There's always something more to learn. But the other thing you learn along the way is there's always somebody there that will gladly help you, that you can make friends with, that can help you, show you the way. There's always somebody who's got a little bit more experience in something than you that you can learn from, and it's very empowering when you realize that. I feel
you also mentioned that you.
That's true, and it's.
I was going to ask you. You mentioned that you make music, and I was curious if you approach, if the approach is the same sort of deal, like you're just sort of diving in, and then you have explored something and found a niche in somewhere.
Yeah, although I don't make the music for monetary purposes, right? I make it because it's my passion, has always been. And you could say that because I started because my big brother was playing the keyboard, I think it's called, we call it keyboard in German, it's probably called keyboard in English. And then I did that too, and then at some point I was like, okay, cool, so is this it? And then I found out you could actually play the piano, where you don't just use the right hand, but you use both hands. And I wanted to take classes, couldn't afford it, so just kind of learned it by myself and just went from there. And it's a very interesting way how that does things to your brain. And I found it very inspiring, and I found it helps me. I don't know, it helps, but there's some chemical processes going on there, right, that I don't know, but it helps me, and it helped me stay on top of things. It gives me something. And so music is my way of finding my God, anything I could say now would sound so cheesy, but it's just a passion for me. And it's the similar way that I would tackle everything, really, which is also something that actually, to get back to the Bitcoin topic, I would have to learn, because I don't know how familiar you are with the way things are done in Germany, but in Germany, overall, I'm generalizing, but overall, everything's very structured. And the way you are brought up is very structured, and you plan ahead. And everything has its place, everything has its rules, and you have to have a plan for how you go about things. That does not work if you go abroad and you travel. And if you go and you go into Bitcoin, which is not favored by the monetary overlords, then that is also not, well, that's also not the preferred way to go about it. So there's a process there that you kind of go against that structure, and you have to learn to trust yourself that you can figure things out, that you can find these paths for yourself, and that you can learn how to use these things. So learn how to make music, learn how to travel, learn how to be fine on your own, and learn how to self-custody your money. So there's personal responsibility is a big deal that we are not necessarily taught, but that we need so badly, but that seems so scary that you would rather not try it, and that you would rather trust someone else to know what's best for you, which is not hardly ever, but often it's not the case.
A lot of people, especially in Bitcoin, they talk about freedom, and it's like a huge value to them. But I think when most people face true freedom, what they really are facing is true responsibility, true self-responsibility. And a lot of people shy away from that. A lot of people LARP, so to speak, about freedom, but they don't have the tools necessarily to deal with that freedom, because everything becomes their choice, their decision, and they're not necessarily willing to face the consequences if they screw up. And I think that's something that a lot of people should consider a little bit more often.
Yeah. And I do think it's
one thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important to add that you shouldn't be like happy-go-lucky and, I'm just going to do this, and, I lost my seed phrase or whatever, and, I'm just going to go abroad, and oops, I needed a visa to go here. Like, you should not be like that. I feel like I'm kind of coming across that way. I do go with the flow, but I do make plans. So, for example, you can't run a company if you're not planning ahead. Like, you can be very chill and kind of seeing where things take you in your personal life, but then you have to actually have a plan in your professional life. And you have to have a plan with your money. You have to invest the time, but you also have to trust the process a little bit.
As an artist, a lot of artists, there's the term the muse. Do you have a muse? Is Bitcoin your muse?
I thought a muse is always like a woman in your life or something. I googled that the other day, actually.
Well, that's traditionally what it is.
Is there a woman in your life that is your muse?
Why did I Google that? That's so random. Maybe. A muse. I mean, so speaking of people, obviously I have people in my life who just oddly inspire me at times through the most random things, or just people who I'm close to that inspire things, so people I can bounce ideas off of, and then or sometimes just through a conversation something comes up, or just the thing with creativity is it comes up so randomly. A place can trigger it, a person, a situation can trigger it, but just also your overall state of being can trigger it, right? And of course, Bitcoin is in that sense a massive trigger of inspiration, because it gives me so many things that I can tackle. Because at first glance it's just this technology, but it touches so many aspects of our existence. Like it touches economics, obviously technology, monetary, financial topics, even the philosophy, game theory, then self responsibility, then the social aspect of what do I do with my no-coiner friends, and there's so many things you can talk about that I have almost 200 comics now, and I still have loads of ideas. So,
part of you, when you travel all over the world, you come into contact with all these different cultures and all these different ways of doing things. Do you like to collect, so to speak, different aspects of cultures and values? And do you find something that, like the way they do things in the Philippines or in Japan is, that's something I want to adopt into my thinking, into my value system, into my life? Is that something you've gained as you've traveled? Yeah.
Definitely. I think you tend to, and you don't even have to be traveling to do that, you tend to try and take the best aspects of maybe the environments and the people you surround yourself with as you go through life, which is why people always say it's important who you surround yourself with, like be around people who make you better, and like that, all that kind of motivational stuff, right? But definitely, so for me, different cultures have influenced me a lot. I do notice, for example, so did I say that? But when I left Germany, I went to Japan. So I did a working holiday in Japan, and that was kind of heavy because I spoke some Japanese, but I went to this village north of Tokyo, and I worked in a Hawaiian restaurant. I was flipping pancakes, and the people did not speak English, and I spoke broken Japanese. So that just threw me straight into that life. And in Japan is a country where you can do so many things wrong from a societal perspective. So I learned a lot of things in a very short amount of time about a life that was completely different from what I was used to, because a life where it's very important to save face, where there's a lot of focus placed on how you behave yourself, and then also a difference between how you behave yourself as a woman versus as a man, and then sort of politeness is a huge deal over there. And I notice until now that in certain, say, formal situations, or when I'm around people that I have a lot of respect for, then sometimes I will do this, which is very Japanese, because in Japan, so it's a combination of two things, where obviously it's the bowing. So there's like, depending on who you meet, you bow deeper or not as deep, or like there's a whole thing around it. And the other thing is when somebody talks to you and you're listening to them, like normally you would listen, like you're quiet, right? But in Japan, that is actually considered kind of rude. And to signal to somebody that you're listening, you're gonna be giving like affirming sounds all the time. So if you're talking to me, telling me something, then I'm gonna be like, hi, hi. So like that. So sometimes I don't do the sounds anymore, but I still do this sometimes. And then I think like, what, like, but it's kind of ingrained now, which it's not like a deep cultural thing, but it's just something that's stuck. So it's an example of the things that I picked up.
What do you ever think that you will settle down in a singular place and kind of reduce the amount of travel you're doing, or do you consider that you'll probably be a nomad for at least the indefinite future?
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't think that is a lifestyle you can do your entire life. And I think also priorities change. So for me, it is, first, it was a necessity because I went around and was doing promotion. And then now I'm going around for the Little Hodler. And Little Hodler is at most conferences. And then it makes sense for me to be there. So that works perfectly with the lifestyle I have anyway. And so I don't see any need to change it, especially because it's pretty much exactly in line with what I want to do. That being said, I don't know, I could wake up tomorrow and say, oh, I want to settle in, I don't know, somewhere. That's the other question. Like, I am very happy to settle. I just need to figure out where, right? So for now, I'd like to keep my options open, just because it works, like, and if it stops working, then I'll figure it out. Then it's the going with the flow approach, I suppose.
How many languages would you, I mean, you're not fluent in millions of languages, but how many languages do you feel pretty comfortable with?
Oh, well, German, English,
yeah,
and Japanese. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I've had some French classes, but I had some Chinese classes, but I also would hardly say I can speak that at all.
Japanese and Chinese seem very difficult to learn for Western speakers. Is that, yeah?
You would think that, but I actually found French more difficult because, as an example, Japanese is very difficult the first 2 weeks because you sit down and they throw at you 3 alphabets with
different characters.
Well, actually 2. But let's say 3. Yeah, different characters, and the actual kanji. What's it? The actual. It's called kanji. The actual like little characters. Yeah, which is, I think they have 2,000 of those, and then each alphabet has 48 letters. I think. So you have to learn those. You're not going to learn 2,000 characters in 2 weeks, obviously, but the alphabets. So that is killer. But then you notice their grammar is extremely, it's simple because, for example, Japanese only has 2 tenses. So it has present tense and past tense. There is no conjugating verbs or anything. There is no crazy gendered speech like we have in German or like you have in French. So that makes it very easy. It's also a language that you can easily pronounce because everything is pronounced exactly the way you read it. And so people are very, well, not everywhere in Japan, but if you go to Tokyo, you'll be able to understand what people are saying quite easily. So the spoken Japanese, if you let out the, learning the characters, actually not that hard to learn. But then comes a point where you learn the politeness forms and rules. And then it just, that is madness. I was told even the Japanese are struggling with that.
Before we wrap, we have like a question that we like to ask a lot of our guests that is what, as you've been in Bitcoin for a while, there's different aspects of it, whether it's mining, the difficulty adjustment, the price is what people start with. But over time that changes and people get more really passionate about specific aspects. Is there any aspect of Bitcoin or Bitcoin's future that has really piqued your interest or excited you recently?
I'm personally, because I'm not that proficient in like everything technological, which I know I should read more about. Like I'm never comfortable with my technological understanding of Bitcoin, but
sure.
Everybody has their focus, right? So my focus is very much on communicating Bitcoin to people. And I've been very interested in the different ways that can be done, the different ways people respond to it in different countries, in different ages, different situations in their life. So I really like that. So I kind of like the personal aspect of it. I like how you talk about it and then how you start using it. And I like to think back about to the first time I was looking at Bitcoin and I was reading the Wikipedia article, and it just, that you can't do that. Like you cannot ask people to go and Google Bitcoin. No. Like that's just gonna kill any interest before it even arises. So I like that. I like the idea of how do we get Bitcoin out there in a way that's not nerdy and too techy and
make it cool, make it fun.
Yeah, exactly. So
useful.
That I really like. And then sorry, can I say 2 things? I have one more thing.
Yeah.
Cool. So I was in Nashville last week for so the Human Rights Foundation had an event there at Bitcoin Park. I don't know if you've been.
Not yet. I really want to go there. I hear it's great.
It's cool. I didn't know. So I drove to Nashville from the airport, and I drove past like 2 houses, and it looked like a massive house party. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Like that's so American. Like a barbecue on the front porch or something. And I came back, and it turns out that was Bitcoin Park. It was these 2 buildings, and people were hanging outside and just like having their lunch. Anyway, so there they actually made an effort to invite people from all over the world, and that included community managers and meetup organizers from the most remote parts of the world who are doing Bitcoin stuff in their region, like maybe in their community, in their village, on their little island. And a lot of them have circular economies there, which I find amazing. I feel like we're not talking about that enough. So we talk about Bitcoin Beach, which those guys were there too, and they're awesome. But they have so many copycat projects now.
Yes.
That's awesome. And it's just working over there. And it's just slowly growing. It's really grassroots. And I love that stuff.
That's how I think Bitcoin or hyper-Bitcoinization will start. It'll be these circular economies spreading all over the world. And that seems to be kind of what's going on. And so one of the things that I've talked about on this podcast a few times is that Bitcoin is so siloed in people's minds. It's an abstract concept. It's something that we interact with on our screens, on our phones, on our computers. But having physical Bitcoin symbols and art and things in the meat world, so to speak, the physical space is so important because it kind of bridges that gap that Bitcoin is a real and lasting thing that will be here. And then when you see it, you see the signs, you see the plushies, like that's so important. So that's why I think it's so cool that you've got the plushies, and I want the Little Hodler, and I'm getting one for my 4-year-old niece for Christmas. So that's going to be, So yeah, can you there we go.
I think there you go, yeah. I think the interesting thing, and that's something that I also had to tell myself at some point, because and I think many artists have that feeling at some point, that you feel like you're non-essential because like you're just an artist. Like technically, yeah, you can live without art. Like let's say you run out of water, right? That's an immediate problem. Like you have to solve that immediately. You run out of art, it's like, yeah, but actually there's a purpose to that, and it fulfills a kind of need within us that's kind of hard to grasp. It builds bridges to a sort of understanding, a sort of communication of values, of ideas, and it is in that sense important for Bitcoin because it helps communicate what we already know about Bitcoin to new audiences, and that I feel is not non-essential, and I feel like artists in the space need to be aware of that.
So
you
I was just going to say, I know Dan has to hop off here pretty quick, but Lina, can you just sort of talk about where to find you, your work, what you're working on next, and sort of the end credits of the show?
Yeah. And we'll have it in the show notes, but let people know where they can go to get a Little Hodler as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, you get the Little Hodlers on thelittlehodler.com. And my socials are my name, which I'm going to spell it for you because it's German. It's at Lina, and then it's Seiche, which you pronounce Sieche. But most people don't.
So we just say Lina.
Because it's very hard to pronounce.
I was going to say the very American Midwest way, psych.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I get that sometimes. Or I get Sieche. Yeah.
Sieche. Yeah.
Seiche. Yeah.
Any interesting projects coming up?
Yeah, but it's still secret. But I can say it's like I have some plans for something very physical Little Hodler stuff.
Awesome.
Real world Little Hodler stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I've never received those questions before. Many of them are new. I loved it.
Awesome. Cool. I'll cut it. Thanks again for listening to the High Hash Rate podcast. You can find us on Twitter at High Hash Rate, or you can hit up Dan at Heartland Bitcoin, HRTLND Bitcoin, or myself, Mike, at Rundance Bitcoin. That's all one word, Rundance Bitcoin. If you're a fellow pleb or you just want to shoot the shit with two high Bitcoiners, reach out to us.
Holy Toledo!